Tonight, you'll probably climb into a bed without thinking twice. You'll adjust your pillow, pull up a blanket, maybe complain that the mattress is too firm or too soft. Then you'll close your eyes. For the next several hours, you'll be completely unconscious, and you'll assume you'll wake up safely tomorrow morning. For almost all of human history, that assumption didn't exist. Long before memory foam, wooden bed frames, or even simple blankets, sleep was one of the riskiest things a person could do. Because the moment you fell asleep, you stopped watching, you stopped listening, you stopped reacting to a predator. You became the easiest target in the landscape. So how did our ancestors solve that problem? Did they simply collapse onto bare ground every night? Not even close. Ancient humans didn't just search for a place to sleep, they engineered one. Every decision after sunset could mean surviving until sunrise. That meant sleep wasn't passive, it was strategic. A single mistake in where or how you rested could decide whether you woke up at all. So humans began to design their nights with intention. They chose locations carefully, built layers beneath their bodies, maintained fire, stayed close to one another, and slowly transformed the most vulnerable hours of the day into something much safer. The first bed wasn't furniture, it was survival. Every handful of grass, every glowing ember, every familiar face sleeping nearby was part of a strategy that had been refined over thousands of generations. But before humans could invent comfortable sleeping places, they faced a much older challenge, one that had nothing to do with pillows and everything to do with gravity. Because for millions of years, the safest place to sleep wasn't on the ground at all. It was high above it, among the branches, where one wrong movement could still mean falling. But the dangers below were often far worse. Long before anyone built a bed, our ancestors slept somewhere very different, above the ground. If you watch chimpanzees today, you'll notice something remarkable. Every evening, they don't simply fall asleep on a branch. They build. Flexible branches are bent into shape. Leaves are woven together. Within minutes, a sturdy nest appears high in the canopy. Tomorrow, they'll often build another one. These aren't random piles of leaves. They're carefully constructed sleeping platforms. Early members of our evolutionary family almost certainly relied on similar strategies. Sleeping in trees offered obvious advantages. Many ground predators couldn't easily reach them. The damp soil stayed far below. Biting insects were reduced. Height provided an early warning system against anything climbing upward, but evolution rarely gives advantages for free. As our ancestors became taller, heavier, and increasingly adapted to walking upright, life in the trees became less practical. A body built for long-distance walking isn't perfectly designed for balancing on narrow branches through an entire night. Eventually, the trees stopped being the safest option. There was no longer a place that offered complete safety. Every option now carried a different kind of danger. Humans could no longer rely on the canopy to carry them through the darkness. The ground offered more space. Larger groups could stay together. Food and tools were easier to manage. For the first time, safety no longer came from height. It had to come from cooperation. But it also belonged to predators. Lions, hyenas, leopards, hunters that moved through the landscape most actively when humans were least aware. The moment humans left the trees, sleep became one of the most dangerous activities in daily life. Simply lying down now required planning, not just courage. Because surviving the night demanded something our ancestors had never needed before. They had to transform an open landscape into a place that felt safe. And surprisingly, their most powerful defense wasn't sharper weapons. It was a glowing circle of fire. Imagine trying to fall asleep knowing something with sharper teeth. Better hearing and far better night vision might already be watching you. That was the reality for our ancestors. The moment darkness arrived, humans lost one of their greatest advantages, vision. And in that loss, something important happened. The world didn't become more dangerous because predators changed. It became more dangerous because humans became nearly blind, while predators did not. That imbalance defined the night. Sleeping on open ground wasn't simply uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Then humanity gained something extraordinary. Fire. Most people think of fire as a way to cook food or stay warm, but it changed something even more fundamental. It changed the night. A campfire created a circle of light in a world that had previously belonged to darkness. Its warmth slowed the loss of body heat during cold nights. Its smoke discouraged many insects, and while fire could not fully protect humans from every predator lurking beyond the glow, it transformed the night from total exposure into a managed boundary of light and shadow. That shift mattered more than absolute safety, because now danger was no longer everywhere at once. It had edges, and edges can be watched suddenly. People had a place where they could gather after sunset instead of immediately hiding from the darkness. Families repaired tools, prepared food, looked after children, shared stories, and perhaps just as importantly, they stayed together. A group sleeping around a fire was far safer than scattered individuals sleeping alone. If one person woke to an unfamiliar sound, everyone else could wake moments later. The camp itself became a living alarm system. Fire didn't eliminate danger, but it reduced it enough for humans to begin thinking about something completely different: comfort. Because once surviving the night became slightly easier, people started asking a new question. If we're going to sleep here every evening, why are we sleeping directly on the cold ground? And that simple question may have led to humanity's very first bed. Once fire made the night a little safer, another problem became impossible to ignore. The ground, it was cold, hard, often damp, and somehow every rocky campsite seemed capable of hiding one perfectly placed stone beneath a sleeping shoulder. Our ancestors didn't understand insulation or body heat the way modern science does. They didn't need to. Experience was enough. Night after night, they noticed that sleeping on dry plants felt warmer than lying directly on bare earth. A thick layer of grass trapped pockets of air. Leaves softened the uneven ground. Animal hides created a barrier against moisture and cold. Little by little, comfort became another survival tool. This wasn't an entirely new idea. Many animals already built nests. Birds lined theirs with soft materials. Rodents filled burrows with dried vegetation. Even modern great apes carefully arrange branches and leaves before resting. Humans inherited that instinct, but something crucial changed. They were no longer simply copying nature. They were beginning to refine it, turning instinct into deliberate design. Instead of weaving nests high in trees, they built them on the forest floor. But these early beds had one major weakness. They didn't stay clean for long. After days of use, plant bedding collected dirt, moisture, insects, food scraps, and parasites. What began as comfort slowly turned into a hidden breeding ground for fleas and ticks, so people adapted once again. Old bedding was removed, fresh plants replaced it, and in doing so, something unexpected happened. This wasn't just cleanliness as we understand it today, it was survival. By regularly stripping away contaminated material, they were unknowingly reducing disease, parasites, and infection risk. Sometimes the used material was even burned before a new sleeping surface was prepared. Without realizing it, our ancestors had begun practicing one of humanity's earliest forms of housekeeping. And astonishingly, archaeologists have found evidence that they were already doing this nearly 200,000 years ago. Hidden inside an ancient cave, the oldest known beds on Earth were waiting to be discovered. For thousands of years, the first human beds completely disappeared. Grass rots, leaves decay, wood turns to dust. If ancient people slept on plants, how could anyone possibly prove it? The answer was hidden inside a cave. In the Lubombo Mountains of southern Africa, archaeologists excavating Border Cave uncovered something extraordinary. Not a skeleton, not a weapon, but microscopic traces of ancient grass at first. They looked insignificant. Tiny plant fragments mixed into layers of soil. But as researchers examined the cave more closely, a pattern began to emerge. The grass wasn't scattered randomly across the floor. It appeared in carefully chosen areas toward the back of the shelter, exactly where people would have been safest from wind, rain, and curious predators. Even more surprising, those plant layers often rested on beds of ash. That wasn't just an accident. Ash absorbs moisture, makes life difficult for many crawling insects, and creates a cleaner surface than damp earth alone. Whether ancient people fully understood why it worked doesn't really matter. They noticed the results, and they repeated the behavior. Some of the bedding even contained traces of aromatic plants that may have helped discourage insects, hinting that people were already experimenting with natural pest control nearly 200,000 years ago. Think about what that means. These weren't people collapsing onto bare cave floors. They were preparing sleeping spaces, maintaining them, improving them, and in doing so, they left behind something far more significant than debris. This wasn't just evidence of where they slept. It was evidence that they were already shaping their environment with intention for what came next. The world's first bedroom wasn't decorated with furniture. It was built from grass, ash, fire, and experience passed from one generation to the next. But ancient bedding had one unavoidable problem. No matter how carefully it was built, eventually it became dirty. And solving that problem may reveal something remarkable about how prehistoric people thought long before civilization ever began. Building a comfortable bed was only half the challenge. Keeping it comfortable was something else entirely. Imagine sleeping on the same pile of grass every night. At first, it feels soft, warm, dry, but after days or weeks, everything changes. The bedding begins collecting dirt, moisture, food crumbs, loose hair, tiny insects searching for a new home. What started as a place to rest slowly becomes the perfect shelter for fleas, ticks, and other unwanted guests. Our ancestors didn't know what bacteria were. They had never heard the word parasite, but they understood something far more important: experience. They noticed that old bedding became unpleasant. Fresh bedding felt better, so they created a simple routine. When a sleeping surface became worn out, it was replaced. Archaeological evidence from sites like Border Cave and later Sibudu Cave doesn't just list materials or dates. It reads like a quiet sequence of human decisions preserved in soil. Layer after layer told the same story. Old plant bedding removed, Fresh layers carefully placed, life reset again and again in the same sleeping space. In some cases, the older bedding was burned before a new one was prepared. That accomplished several things at once. Fire destroyed insects, reduced waste, and left behind ash that made the next sleeping surface even less inviting for crawling pests. Some bedding layers also included aromatic plants, suggesting that people may have deliberately chosen vegetation with insect-repelling properties. No instruction manual, no scientific theory, just thousands of careful observations passed from one generation to the next. And in that repetition, something larger becomes clear. Long before anyone understood microbes or hygiene, humans were already shaping their environment to protect themselves from them. Without realizing it, our ancestors had already developed one of humanity's earliest forms of household maintenance. But even after the bedding was prepared, another mystery remained. Did ancient humans actually sleep through the night the way we do today? Or did darkness follow a rhythm completely different from our own? Once the fire was burning and the bedding was prepared, another mystery begins. What actually happened after everyone closed their eyes? Did ancient humans sleep for one long stretch, the way many people do today? Or did the night follow a completely different rhythm? The honest answer is, we don't know for certain. Sleep doesn't fossilize. Archaeologists can uncover hearths, tools, and ancient bedding, but they can't excavate dreams. Still, there are clues. Historical records from much later societies describe something called first sleep and second sleep. People would rest for several hours, wake naturally in the middle of the night, spend time talking, tending the fire, praying, or quietly working, then return to sleep before dawn. Could prehistoric people have done something similar? Possibly, but there is no direct evidence proving that every ancient community followed the same pattern. In fact, modern hunter-gatherer groups suggest something even more interesting. Without electric lights, people often stay awake around evening fires long after sunset, talking, repairing tools, or caring for children before finally falling asleep. Even more fascinating, not everyone sleeps at exactly the same time. Some naturally stay awake later. Others wake much earlier. That overlap may have created an unexpected advantage. The camp may never have been completely asleep. While most of the group slept, someone was often still awake. Not because they had been assigned guard duty, but simply because human sleep has always been wonderfully varied, and that natural variation may have protected entire camps from predators, without anyone ever planning it. But perhaps the greatest benefit of sleeping together wasn't safety at all. It was what happened before anyone fell asleep. Because around those fires, humanity began sharing something even more valuable than warmth: knowledge. When the sun disappeared, the world changed. Hunting slowed, travel became dangerous, darkness forced people to stay close together. And for the first time all day, everyone gathered in one place. The campfire wasn't just a source of warmth. It became the center of human life. Imagine a small group sitting around glowing embers. Children lean against their parents. Hunters repair broken spear points. Someone adds another branch to the fire while another quietly watches the darkness beyond the light. Hours pass. No one is searching for food anymore. No one is crossing rivers or tracking animals. For a brief part of every day, survival paused. That pause may have changed humanity forever. Anthropologists believe evenings created valuable time for conversation, teaching, and cooperation. Important knowledge, where to find water, how to avoid dangerous predators, which plants were safe to eat, could be passed from one generation to the next without the distractions of daytime survival. Stories weren't simply entertainment. They were memory. A dramatic tale about someone ignoring fresh leopard tracks would be remembered far longer than a list of safety rules. The campfire became humanity's first classroom, its first meeting place, its first shared archive of experience. Sleeping nearby strengthened those bonds. Children remained close to experienced adults. The injured stayed protected. Older members of the group could share knowledge that younger hunters had not yet learned. Night after night, trust quietly grew. But people rarely stayed in one place forever. As some groups returned to the same shelters again and again, those sleeping places slowly began to change. The temporary camp was becoming something more permanent, and with that transformation, the simple grass bed would begin evolving into the first true home. For thousands of years, human camps were temporary. A group would hunt, rest, move on, then return only when the seasons allowed. But eventually, something began to change. Some places were simply too valuable to abandon. A nearby river, reliable game, natural shelter, a cave that blocked cold winds every winter. People returned again and again and again. Each visit left small improvements behind. The ground was cleared. Fresh bedding replaced old layers. The fire was rebuilt in the same safe location. Sleeping spaces became familiar instead of temporary without realizing it. Our ancestors had begun shaping the landscape itself. Archaeologists often find repeated occupation layers inside ancient shelters, showing that people weren't choosing a new sleeping place every night. They were maintaining the same locations across many generations. Those spaces slowly developed structure, areas for sleeping, areas for preparing food, areas for making tools. Not because anyone designed a blueprint, but because repeated habits gradually organized daily life. The place where people rested also became the place where children grew up, where elders shared stories, and where families returned year after year. In a way, the first home wasn't built with walls, it was built with memory, a familiar fire, a familiar sleeping place. And familiar people gathered around both. As human communities became larger and more settled, those simple camps continued to evolve. Grass was eventually joined by woven mats as people sought greater comfort and insulation from the cold ground. Animal hides became carefully prepared coverings, offering better warmth and durability. Then came wooden platforms, raised sleeping surfaces, and eventually furniture itself. The modern bed wasn't invented overnight. It was the final chapter of an idea that had already been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years. And surprisingly, the most important part of that evolution was never the bed itself. It was the feeling of safety that came with it. When most people think about the history of beds, they imagine furniture, wooden frames, soft mattresses, comfortable pillows. But those things came much later, long before humans slept above the ground. They had already solved the much bigger problem: how to feel safe while unconscious. That's easy to overlook today. Every night, you willingly enter a state where you can't react quickly. You trust that nothing dangerous will happen before morning. That trust wasn't always possible. Our ancestors had to create it, not with locks or walls, but with cooperation, a carefully chosen campsite, a warm fire that burned through the night, fresh bedding made from dry plants, companions sleeping only a few feet away. Every one of those details reduced risk. Individually, they seemed ordinary. Together, they transformed sleep itself. The bed wasn't the invention, the environment was. Over thousands of generations, humans became experts at preparing places where the body could finally relax. As villages appeared, those same ideas remained. Homes replaced temporary camps. Roofs replaced rock overhangs, woven mats replaced piles of grass. Eventually came raised wooden platforms, stuffed mattresses, blankets, and everything we recognize today. The materials changed, the purpose never did. Every modern bedroom still follows the same ancient formula. Control the temperature, block unwanted noise, keep insects away, create a familiar space, then allow yourself to become vulnerable. In many ways, your bedroom is simply an updated prehistoric campsite. The technology looks different, the psychology doesn't, and that may be the most surprising lesson of this entire story, because after hundreds of thousands of years, humans are still solving exactly the same problem our ancestors faced every single night, just with better pillows. Let's go back to where this story began. Tonight, before you fall asleep, you'll probably perform a series of tiny rituals without even noticing. You'll adjust your pillow, pull the blanket into just the right position, turn off the lights, maybe check that the door is locked. Perhaps you'll switch on a fan or listen to quiet music before closing your eyes. They feel like modern habits, but in reality, they're echoes of something far older. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans have prepared the space around them before surrendering to sleep. Our ancestors gathered dry grass, chose sheltered ground, fed the fire, stayed close to family, and listened carefully to the darkness before finally closing their eyes. The tools have changed, the instinct hasn't. A mattress replaced woven plants, walls replaced cave entrances, central heating replaced glowing embers, but the goal remains exactly the same. Create a place that feels safe enough to become completely vulnerable. That's what a bed has always been. Not just somewhere to sleep, but a carefully prepared refuge from the outside world. Perhaps that's why people become so attached to their bedrooms. They're more than furniture and blankets. They're environments designed to calm one of the oldest survival systems inside the human brain. So the next time you climb into bed, remember what you're really experiencing. Not a modern luxury, but the latest version of an idea that began long before cities, before farming, before written history itself. A pile of grass became a woven mat. The woven mat became a mattress, and every improvement carried the same silent promise. Tonight, you can finally sleep without fear.